Morena, Harimai. Thank you for joining myself, Liza Viz, CEO of Beyond Recruitment, at this morning's webinar in partnership with our knowledge expert, Megan Jenkins. The topic we'll be exploring in this morning's webinar is managing organizational and team change post-COVID. 2022 has certainly not been a walk in the park. There's no doubt that COVID-19 has changed the workplace climate. Profound changing circumstances have brought about challenges for employers, business leaders, team culture, and individual priorities. Employers and leaders are experiencing significant change and new challenges in how they manage people returning back to the workplace post-lockdowns and managing teams, team culture, and individual priorities in the new hybrid way of working. Severe talent shortages, with limited talent coming into the country, whilst increasing numbers of employees leaving their jobs and careers, have brought about a colliding and unique set of circumstances and trends that employers are navigating. Furthermore, mental well-being has increased significantly, and this too has created additional pressure on business leaders, on teams, on colleagues, and on individuals. So, how do we navigate through these challenging and changing times? This is the question we at Beyond Recruitment are hearing constantly from the businesses that we are working with and the business leaders. Today's topic, therefore, is pertinent to employers, leaders, and HR managers grappling with the new paradigm. Many are seeking answers in balancing the equilibrium while still taking care of one's own well-being. Megan Jenkins, our presenter and knowledge expert, is an experienced change manager. Megan will this morning explore with us how we develop change resilience and provide practical strategies for successfully leading through the new demands brought about by the thrust of change arising out of the smolders of a global COVID pandemic and the realities of a new COVID world. Megan has over 20 years' experience as a registered organizational psychologist and has served in various internal and consulting roles, both in New Zealand and in the United Kingdom. At a strategic level, Megan's change management and organizational psychology skills enable her to help leaders gain insights into the key success factors for leading through the challenges of change. Since 2018, Megan has served as a committee member of the Institute of Organizational Psychology. Megan leverages her organizational psychology qualifications and background to build change capability with teams and leaders. This morning, Megan will be sharing her insights and pointers, which I'm sure we will all find very helpful. You are welcome to submit questions throughout the webinar. Megan will have visibility of the questions during the webinar and will work through some of these with you as we go. In case you've missed any parts of the webinar, please note that the webinar is being recorded and we will send this through to you as an attendee afterwards. You're welcome to share this webinar with your colleagues or your team. It now gives me great pleasure to welcome Megan Jenkins and to hand over to Megan. Thank you, Megan, and welcome.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa, and morena, everyone. I hope that wherever in Aotearoa this finds you, that you're doing all right today. But certainly, you know, the landscape that Lisa has painted is one that is challenging for people at the moment. I know that we've got sort of on top of the last 2.5, almost 3 years of COVID, that there are ongoing challenges for organisations and also for leaders and HR people through New Zealand as well, as we continually navigate sort of more change. And I think that, you know, with the economic landscape as well, that's really an added blow of late as well, just making things a bit harder and a bit more challenging. So what I'd like to do today is just really dip into some of the background that I have in organisational psychology and really try to uncover this area of stress and well-being and really look at what does it really mean in terms of how we operate as human beings with our neuroscience, and what we know might be some tips that can help us actually navigate change. I'll also take you through a little bit of research as well, particularly around what are some of the key ways that we know are going to engage and also motivate people in organisations. And finally, leave you with a few practical tips and stories as well. Before we get into some further content though, what we thought would be quite good was to just get some interaction from you guys and to really look at what might be some of the current concerns that you have about managing people through your ongoing change. So thanks to Joel, he'll be putting a link into the chat where you can go in and actually respond to this question. And just a note though that please don't include any confidential work or personal information as we will be collating your messages. So as Liza mentioned, we've off the back of COVID, there's a number of things which beyond a hearing are some of the challenges. For myself, I'm hearing challenges around people feeling overwhelmed, people feeling anxious. There's also an issue around retention of talent and concern about turnover as well. I think nearing the end of the year, people just are wanting to have Christmas here sooner than it might be and really be able to just have a break. So whatever it is for you, it would be great for you just to fill in that poll, thanks. So I'm starting to see some of the responses come through. So yeah, there's a lot there around sort of the risk of the burnout and people just feeling really, really tired. So that's a really good point to think about. Why are we feeling so overwhelmed? Why are we actually feeling so tired at the moment? And then really looking at a balance in how individuals are working and the team. So sure, a lot of us, I think, have got used to hybrid working or even working from home, which has definite benefits, but how do you still keep that team connection? Resistance to change is coming through as well. So issues with mistrust and how to manage that. So great. Thanks everybody. We've got 44 responses, so apologies. I'm not going to be able to go through all of them, but I'll definitely call out a few of them. Yep, and then just around team buy-in as well. And that talent concern, so risk of losing good people. Great. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Let's leave it there, and Beyond will be able to circulate the responses afterwards, just so that you can see, what other people's concerns are as well. And one of the things that I've found from doing some of these change capability sessions over the years is that often it's never nice to be going through struggles and feeling as if you're challenging. But one of the key things that can help is to feel that you're no different than other people in your business. So really then, it really helps normalize it to then think about what you can do to move on. So I'm hoping that today that you'll be able to go away with some greater understanding and maybe one or two tips of things that you could do. So let's get now into a little bit around the stress and well-being, and just to explain why some people might be feeling very stressed and certainly feeling not their best in the workplace as well. So I want to kind of deliver this material in in two ways, really. One of them is for you to be acknowledging and understanding how this might be playing out in your teams. But I also want to acknowledge just the level or the weight that that a lot of the business is having on leaders themselves. So would encourage you to really understand and try to sort of appreciate how this might be playing out in your own sort of lives as well, at work and also outside of work. So first of all, let's kind of get into some understanding about how our brains operate and some learnings that we have from neuroscience. So what we have in front of us is the human brain, and it's the central nervous system part of the human brain, which, as you can see, is divided into two main sections. So on the left-hand side is the sympathetic nervous system, and on the right-hand side is the parasympathetic nervous system. So have a think yourselves about what is it like for you when you're feeling a bit agitated or stressed or overwhelmed. And often when I ask this of people, they come up with things like, gosh, I have a bit of a foggy brain. I find that my concentration is definitely suffering, and actually I can't really think very well. And other people say that they feel as if they've got sweaty palms. They might realise that their heart rate is increasing. And for others, they can have actually digestive issues or feel as if they've got an upset tummy. So all of these responses are our normal response to change. And our body's hardwired response really to any kind of perceived stress. And what we have here is that it's actually our natural stress response that we have through our sympathetic nervous system. So I'm sure that all of you have heard of the fight or flight response. It's never nice to sort of go through some of those physical elements in terms of how they play out in our bodies, and that can make us feel even more on edge or even more sort of anxious about what might be going on. The important thing to realise is that it's really important to try to move yourself back into that parasympathetic nervous system. So that's that whole kind of body rhythm on the right-hand side. And certainly what that does is it allows our body to really have that rest and that digest as well. It allows us to be back into our best kind of operating rhythm for our body and for our mind as well. Another thing I wanted to mention is that when our body is in that continual heightened response and in that stress response, is that what happens is that it's our brain's really hardwired to either fight or to flee a perceived threat. So this might happen without you even being aware of it. So that's why it's quite good just to stop sometimes and reflect and try to gain some self-awareness around, what is my body doing? What is my mind doing? How might I be able to control this better myself? Or how might I be able to do this as a leader? And we will get into some of those aspects later as well. But another key thing is that when the blood actually pumps to our major muscle groups to either fight or flee a perceived threat, what happens then is that the blood actually drains away from our brain. So that's why people often experience that they feel that they might not fight or flight, they might freeze, or that they have difficulties really thinking through a problem. Certainly, people can be a lot less innovative and creative. So a lot of that is really because we're not working in our optimum mental functioning. Another thing to appreciate is that, the build-up of some of those stress hormones, so the cortisol and also the adrenaline, has got some negative health impacts. So it's really important to acknowledge and be aware of this for you, and really to try to be proactive around some steps that you can take. Or it can lead to some health issues, particularly around the cardiovascular disease, or around stomach ulcers and things like that. So another tool that can be quite useful to think about how people move through change is this curve here. And it might be one that you've seen before and looks familiar. For those of you who have seen it, it's actually from some research that Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did back in the 1960s. She was a clinical psychologist who was researching end of life in some terminal patients, and noticed that there were some specific stages that the people and also their families went through. And so this was coined initially as Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. Now, gradually, these kind of models have made their way into organisations because they can operate as a really useful tool for you to actually help understand people's journey through change. And one of the key things to note is that this isn't a linear process at all. So I'm sure that you've all got your own examples that you can think of, whether it's, from your personal life or also in terms of work. Often people can instigate some of these feelings like that shock, that denial, feeling low when they're faced with larger change like organisational restructures. But one of the things really to understand as well is that it's not just what's going on at work for people. Often it's that layering of all of the other things which might be going on for people. So when I've presented and used this curve with groups before, people have found it really encouraging to understand, firstly, that they're normal and their journey through change, their reactions, is no different than other people's. But really, what happens is that people move along this at different stages. I often find that with leaders or with HR people that may have a heads up on organisational changes, it can mean that you actually move through the curve quicker than other people, or that you're further along, so that then you often get this stage where you might be feeling excited about something, but actually other people who are just learning about the change are actually still in that shock and the anxiety kind of mode as well. Another thing is that I remember that when I presented and used this curve with a group of people a few years ago as they were going into a relatively small restructure. So, the leaders didn't think that it was going to be a big reshuffle, but obviously they saw people reacting quite differently. And the people that were more on the left-hand side, I remember that there were a couple who actually had faced some personal bereavement. So for them, that was really a challenging environment for them, learning about the work change, and really hindered them being able to move through this change curve. Another tool that you can use as part of this change curve is this keys to engagement at the bottom of the screen here. So these can be really useful to really understand, sometimes people just need to understand the facts, and sometimes you'll need to repeat those facts as well. Increasing your meetings, increasing your comms around this can be really good just to repeat and to also help people gain clarity about actually what is changing. And often it can be quite good to talk about what's not changing as well, so people don't feel overwhelmed and feel that everything is changing around them. And then sometimes that empathy aspect is just important once people have started to get to grips with what the changes are. Sometimes people, and acknowledging some of your comments in the poll earlier, that can just feel as if there is just a lot going on that they can feel overwhelmed about. So whether it's yourself as professionals, as leaders, as HR people, or whether it's other people, and for yourselves as well, seeking out some of that support, I think is really important too, that sometimes we just need to kind of download and get something off our chest. And then that makes us feel a little bit better, as if we can move on. Another key thing that we see around change is that when people feel as if they're moving through, sometimes it can be quite good to really encourage people to dip their toes in the water. And I remember that I was working in an organisation a few years ago and working with a team that were facing some changes to how they were doing things. And there was one individual who'd been in an admin role for a long time and really liked to help her teammates, but she was quite adverse to the customer interaction and really felt out of her depth. Whereas the change that was facing them was that everyone in their teams needed to start writing customer letters. So for this woman, her reaction was really to feel quite overwhelmed, and that was portrayed in a way that she was resistant, and she was labelled as being resistant by her team and also by her managers. So you can imagine that this wouldn't have been a pleasant scenario to be in terms of those team meetings, where she was quite vocal in a negative way. So that was quite unsettling and didn't do some great things for people's engagement as well. So what helped her move along the change curve is that her leaders really wrapped some support around her and worked with her one-on-one. But also they set up some mentoring, they set up some templates that they got the team to do, and they even set up some processes around some peer review of those as well. And once that change was implemented, she was actually the first person in the team that would often put her hand up when they needed a new customer template done. So that was a great success outcome with that, by understanding where she was at, what some of her blockers were, and also how the leaders might be able to encourage her to move forward with the change. Okay, well let's just have a short pause there, and I just wondered whether there were any questions coming in around any of that we've covered so far. Okay, great. So thank you. The person that talked about getting people back into the office after 15 months and some refusing to. Yep, we will look at that later. So, when there is a need for change, how do we keep our team upbeat enough to deliver the results? Yeah, great. Okay, so Bronnie, if you're happy, I'll just have a look at that later, when there are some tips as well at the end of the webinar. Great. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Let's move on now, and let's dive into what some of the current research is around engagement and motivation. So, when we talk about people at work, there was a really interesting study that was done back in the 1940s, 1950s. Called the Hawthorne Studies. And interestingly, what that was is that it was some people in a warehouse, and they were in a factory. And what they wanted to do was, with their making of widgets, they wanted to actually be able to optimize the production of their workforce. So what they did is that they started doing some research into what would be the optimum environment for people to be able to operate. And they sort of changed things around a little bit, and they particularly looked at the lighting levels that were operating in the factory. And what they found was quite astonishing, and was something that they didn't predict. When they turned the lighting down, they found that productivity went up. When they turned the lighting up, they also found that productivity went up, even if they thought that, gosh, this lighting is getting to, quite glaring sort of levels. So that was really interesting, and it has become known as the Hawthorne effect. And what it really showed is that the workers weren't interested in the level of lighting at all. But what they thought was that the management of the organisation was actually quite interested in them and trying to make the work environment better for them. So it was really all down to how they perceived that they mattered in their job, and that the management were interested in making a better work environment for them. So from there, the work around organisational psychology as a profession and the research has really grown a lot, over the last decades. So let's have a look at some of the current research from organisational psychology. So there's a bit of detail here, and I won't necessarily go through all of it. But a lot of these researchers are actually, or all of the researchers are from New Zealand. You've got a crowd of people who are from AUT here in Auckland, and also Joanna Kuntz at the bottom is from the University of Canterbury. So a lot of the research has been, interestingly, around sort of around the office plan or open plan offices, and certainly around, the hybrid or working from home as well. Some people may recognise Professor Jared Ha is there. So he is a fellow organisational psychologist, and he's really active on LinkedIn, and you may even catch him on Breakfast or on shows like 7 Sharp as well. So if you think about the setup of organisations, the Morrison and Mackey research really looked at the open plan office and found that, a pure kind of open plan office is actually not good. People find it quite unpleasant and quite distracting. We've also looked at, some of the research around COVID, where once again, there's been a lot of concerns around raised workloads, increased anxiety. And also through COVID as well, research that IT stress has been the strongest predictor of people not feeling as if they have got good well-being at work, but that collaboration is the biggest predictor of job satisfaction and engagement and well-being, and then also is a really good buffer for stress. So this kind of research, what we'll do is it will tie it in at the end with some of the tips and tricks that I'll provide. But it's quite interesting, and the person that talked about that, the working from home and trying to get people back into the office, the HA research, which is longitudinal throughout the COVID lockdowns, really has looked at, almost 50% of people actually continue to operate in hybrid, but that those that were actually more at risk of burnout were people that tended to be working from home, and that they were the ones that actually seemed to be more lonely as well as have that sense of stress. And then there's some really positive aspects there, the Kuntz research, which has been replicated in other research avenues as well, around how do we develop resilience, and it's all around developing capability and also creating some of that sense of safety in the workplace, and also some of those social mechanisms as well. So good teams, a learning culture, reducing the stress and anxiety in the workplace as well. Some other research that I saw on LinkedIn yesterday actually was some from Microsoft. And so for those of you who are tending to work from home or have people work from home quite a lot, it really just illustrates the importance of having good breaks, and not back-to-back meetings. I know that, in organisations which do agile working and 2 weekly sprints, that there are quite a lot of ceremonies associated with that, and it's kind of like that fast sort of delivery sense, or that fast design and then delivery for that better release, to customers as well. But one of the things that is a warning really is through this research that it's actually a lot more stressful for our brains to go from meeting to meeting and not have any breaks. And we've also got some other psychological principles that we can look at as well. So we have this concept in psychology called intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So I'll pick up on it later. But obviously, the extrinsic motivation is anything that involves a reward, so an external reward. So obviously, coming to work and being paid can be a great extrinsic motivator. But there are other extrinsic ways that you can use aside from just financial ones. Often companies have different award systems as well, and that can be quite useful as well. Or that intrinsic really is that sense that I'm doing something because it's rewarding to me. So I get fulfillment and I get value out of the work that I do. Now, we also need to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because obviously, and particularly in these kind of tight economic times, we need to have that safety and security first. We need to know that we're going to be able to operate from pay packet to pay packet. But once you kind of try to sort of have that safety, that well-being kind of culture, then you can start to bring in some of the aspects higher up there around purpose and around people feeling fulfilled and people feeling empowered as well in their work. And another thing that I wanted to bring up was the trust triangle. And this is the Beyond people might recognize this diagram because it was taken directly from your website, and some of you that are on today may have gone to Dr. Harold Hillman's webinar back in May when he talked about empathetic leadership and talked about the importance of having trust. So as a leader, people experiencing the real you. So you coming across as being both genuine and also consistent. In terms of that logic aspect, that people can believe what you say as well. So the reasoning, the judgment, and the business decisions that you make, that they're sound. And certainly around that empathy as well, that people feel cared for too. Now, one last theory that I wanted to just get across you today was the psychological empowerment theory. And this is from a researcher back in the 90s called Gretchen Spretzer. So she really looked at a lot of organizations that were doing really well and found that it was the top level managers who were really looking to enhance creativity in their employees by empowering them to take initiative without prodding them, and also really, linking that back to what the collective interests were of the company without any micromanaging. So this sense of empowerment is really important. And I think it really links into our sense in psychology of that sense of control. And often when we're in periods of change, we feel as if we are drowning. We feel overwhelmed because we don't feel that we are in control. But it's really important to kind of have a look at what these 4 conditions might be and think about how you can actually add them into your organisation. So the meaning from the work that you do. So that might be somebody working in a frontline customer role. So getting meaning from helping customers every day. And then the tangible impact of the work that they do. So I know that if I've got an idea, that I feel safe to actually be able to speak up and offer a different suggestion so that we can better serve our customers based on the customer feedback that I have. And then it's people feeling as if they're actually competent to do the job. So think back to the woman who was the admin worker and needing to learn a new skill. So initially she certainly didn't feel competent, but she was developed by her managers and also by her team. And so she learnt to be able to embrace her new role and also then benefit the whole team as well. And certainly that sense of autonomy as well. So here it might be, are you giving people a sense of control over what work tasks that they might focus on from day to day? Or what about in terms of work hours, particularly trying to encourage flexible working or being able to make up hours if people have got, say, an important sports ceremony or a sports game to go to for children that they might have. Okay, what I'll do is that I'll move on and then I'll come back to some, any questions. But what I'd like to do now is to kind of provide some simple steps to how you can actually promote well-being and engagement in your people. And first of all, I want to look more into sort of that whole change resilience side um, and reflect back on some of that physiology that we talked about earlier, how our brains are actually set up to be hardwired for that threat system that we have, really for our own kind of survival as well. So one of the things that you can do is really focus on when you're looking to build that change resilience, what might be going on for yourself or also other people. And a lot of it is in our mindset. It's really important to acknowledge that stress plays out for all of us. So look at actually how you can actually support other people around you and even for workers, understand what they might be feeling stressed about so that then they can move forward to think about some solutions that they might be able to have. So I know that in the example that I gave around the woman who was struggling and feeling quite anxious about doing these customer letters, that her leader actually held quite a lot of one-on-ones with her just to try to uncover, what she was feeling fearful of. And certainly she was somebody who was a really top performer. So she was worried about her reputation. She was somebody that she just liked being a good support for her team, and she felt that she might let the team down. So actually working with her helped this leader help the individual to really look towards how she could learn and still be able to provide that good support to her team and then also to her customers as well. So often it can be quite good just to be aware of what some of that negative self-talk is, or what some of those underlying fears are. So for those of you who can think of people in your organization, I just caution you against labeling people as being resistant to change, because often there are some insecurities or there are some feelings of people not being confident to be able to embrace and move on with the change. So it is really good to just work with them and really to start coaching them around this and asking some questions about how you might be able to support them going forward. I think that particularly, one of the things that can be really powerful with leaders and some of the change leadership work that I've done through the years is that at the end of the day, it can be really empowering for leaders to realize, hey, I've got my regular sessions with my team and I know that Jane, has been through a tough year. Or I know that Joe has actually been talking about you know, wanting some more learning and development and wanting some more challenge in your role. So really use some of those conversations to look at how you might be able to encourage people to move on with their role and to develop them for that empowerment. I think also with that, it's just being aware of how people are. So I know that some people are a lot more conscientious, some people are a lot more anxious as well. So there it can be quite good just to use your knowledge of people to be able to help them. And there's a great thing in terms of recognizing that, you know, things can be challenging at the moment, and it's good to really call that out, but really to look at balancing that with what the positive elements might be. So that's where it's really good to look at what are those 3 positives to a negative, or for people that might feel as if they are learning a new skill and feeling overwhelmed, they don't know it yet. So there it can be quite good to have some of those little celebrations as well. Remember some of that recognition too. And ultimately at the end of the day, you know, it's important to have some of that time out and to have some of those systems in your organization for people that really need it. Now, a couple of other elements here really tap into the social. So remember the research earlier that that sense of collaboration is really important. And one of the things that I've seen through my work in organisations over the years is that often people understand a business decision. They can go through that grief cycle in terms of coping with the change in the new world. But at the end of the day, that sense of support often takes over and is the important thing for people. And then, of course, that physical sort of well-being as well is important. So understanding how stress plays out, using some good practices as well. So I think once upon a time, you know, it was seen as a bit of pseudoscience if you talked about that deep breathing. But what we do know is that that returns us to that lowered heart rate and the blood up to our brains for that optimum thinking and decision-making power. So they can be some good simple things to implement as well. And make sure that your people are also having breaks at work too. So some tips for businesses and leaders. You know, there's the job demands resource model, which was tapped into earlier, really looked at what happens in organisations is that we do have challenges and we do have stresses. So one of the things that you can do is to try to cut down on some of those things that are creating, like say that poor culture. You know, I remember working with a senior manager years ago who was very intelligent, but her style was very autocratic. And so people didn't feel empowered. And there were quite a lot of team members that actually left and moved on from the organisation as a result of that. So it's good to kind of really look at some of those metrics as well. You know, what are things like in your organisation? What are your turnover stats? We know that the cost of turnover is that it can take an average of 6 months to break even after you hire in a new manager. So the cost is huge. So really look at trying to reduce some of these stressors that you have in the workplace. You know, if there are leaders who you know of who are creating some unhappiness, you know, what are some of the things that you can do to perhaps train and coach them? And I think really just not to think of it as a one size fits all, because everybody is quite different in terms of their engagement and motivation. And just a recognition again that the research has found that those working from home all the time feel the most pressure. So they're often the ones that aren't creating that good boundary between work and home. They just say, oh, I'll just answer these emails, I'll just finish this document, which is important. and also the demands in terms of loneliness as well. So recognise that it's about reducing some of these aspects, and then moreover, it's really about what are some of those good things that you already have in your organisation, and what can you optimise for people. So purpose is a really good one. You know, people want to understand a purpose. They also want to understand that what the vision is for the organisation is really clear in terms of how they contribute to it. So that's where all of these organisational systems, like your one-on-ones, even performance appraisals, and 6 monthly or whatever cadence you use for them, are really important for people to have. So I know that there's a great little company on the North Shore in Auckland who do LED lights. And for those of you who know the North Shore, that it was an organisation that started up to solve a problem that along Whangaparo Road, which is a peninsula in the north of Auckland, that there was really a bottleneck with traffic. For those of you who know the Auckland Harbour Bridge, we know that we've got kind of these barriers that sort of move each direction, and that helps the flow of traffic, but you can't do that on sort of a road. And what they did is that they created a middle row of LED lights, and that really changes with the flow of the traffic at different peak hours. So, small businesses can actually get on board with what it actually means, and what the celebration is, what the benefit has been of some of the outputs of your work. And for an organisation of that, they've actually now got some international interest, which is great for them. I'm sure you can all think of other examples like that too. I think if you're looking at sort of the concern about turnover as well, that there's some really simple things that you can do around onboarding. I know that when I've started roles that I've had a buddy, which has been really great. So what are some of those simple mechanisms that you can set up to help new people come in and give them a positive experience? Get people to take ownership of some work. So it might be that you've got a basic guideline of, say, 10 different points of what a customer service person might need to do when they come into their job. We'll get them to expand on that, so that then that can be a good operating manual, or even a handover document, not necessarily when they leave, maybe when they've been promoted up in your organisation. But you've got some rigor around some of those systems that doesn't actually create further stress when you've got new people coming on board. There's a lot there around sort of the culture as well. So once again, for those of you who linked into the Harold Hillman webinar, there's a lot around empathetic leadership and the leadership style, which is really important. So the number one reason why people leave their jobs is because of their immediate manager. So it's really important just to be really conscious of what kind of style that you do have. And to also look at what some of those intrinsic motivators might be around giving people and delegating them authority, but also what some of those sort of more informal extrinsic motivators might be. And they don't necessarily need to be financial rewards. I know of some a childcare company who have got a small number of workers in it, and they do regular dinners. Or I've known teams at work do sort of the Friday afternoon quiz. So all of these kind of things really help create that social bond. Remember that that's a really good buffer, and that can be a really good way of actually de-stressing people as well. And I think that whatever you can do to really help promote people to learn, people to develop, is really useful as well. I've talked about the impact of stress on the brain, but what we also know from neuroscience is this term of neuroplasticity. And once upon a time, people thought that we got to around the age of 25, and unfortunately that was it in terms of our brain capacity. Fortunately for those of us who may be over 25, that's not the case. And creating a learning culture can actually be really good. We do know from work that's been done with people who have had brain injuries and also early dementia patients, that our brains can actually rewire their neural pathways. So particularly I think for people who are working from home, you know, what are some of those opportunities where people want to come back into the office? You know, that social buffer or those learning opportunities, those opportunities to get together as a team. And it doesn't necessarily need to be work related. You know, make some of it social and fun as well in terms of building that bonding, but certainly around, you know, helping create that that empowerment, but also people feeling more energized in their brain and learning as well. So a lot of those are around, you know, can be used around sort of attracting and retaining talent as well. You know, just a couple of other things, you know, we've talked about the importance of breaks during meetings as well. And the hybrid work opportunities too can be really good. And we know that when people work partly at home and have that flexibility, and then also partly in the office, that they are the most satisfied employees, they are the most engaged and also feel as if their social needs are met. So therefore, create some of those opportunities to come in. Get people to tell you what might work. So don't feel as if it has to be your role as a leader telling people what could work in that way. Get the wisdom of the crowd and get people to come up with some of those ideas too. So just finally, I wanted to just put this further slide up, really to acknowledge that being a leader currently will be challenging, you know, and there are the ongoing challenges. Um, if you or other people that you know do need some support, then please do realise that there are places that you can go. So feel free to use any of these that you need to. Um, but what I'll do now is that I'll just go into back into the questions and see what we might have here. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, the question about leading people through the curve without leaving some behind. Yeah, that's difficult. I think that, you know, there's a point where it's important to have one-on-one conversations versus group conversations. And using a mix of both of those can help. You know, it's not okay for people to feel completely overwhelmed and left out, but I think it can be help to have some conversations around, um, you know, Alex, what might you see could be the opportunities in this? So it's important to acknowledge what people might be finding hard, but also to work on what some of those opportunities might be for people as well. And then really to work with that person one-on-one with them too. Um, And I think also acknowledging that's hard, you know, when change can be exciting as well. And people might feel as if it's all, if people are being negative, so that equally can be difficult. Um, let me see, what else have we got here? Yes, sure, I can provide links to the research, no problem. Um, Yeah, so and thank you. Also, there was a question here about the combination of working from home versus time in the office. So yes, absolutely. You know, that was part of the research as well. And we saw that, you know, through that research that people actually did feel more engaged. They felt more innovative as well. And they felt as if they had better well-being. There are some natural barriers in the public sector to meeting extrinsic needs and a culture of stealing talent across agencies. How do we best overcome this? Yeah, it's quite difficult. And I think You know, the first thing often that people might feel when they feel stressed is to think about jumping ship. So I think they're about broaching some of those conversations and having the candor around some of those conversations, and having the courage to have some of those conversations can be quite useful as a leader. One-on-one. You know, once again, it is difficult in terms of those extrinsic needs. I understand. I have worked in the public sector previously as well, and recognise that. But once again, look at the fact that it's not just money that motivate people. At the end of the day, if it is money, you know, people may move anyway, but there's other meaningfulness in work that you can do. There's other kind of that intrinsic motivators that you can prompt for people. So I'd be having some good conversations individually with people around what are some of those things that could help make that a better place. Use your engagement surveys if you have that. I know that sometimes that depends on a culture of trust and whether people can feel as if they can candidly reply to them, but try to create some of that trust yourself. Remember that trust triangle and utilize some of those means to actually encourage people to give you some of that honest feedback and help work through that. Yeah, Joe, that's a difficult question. How do you manage people who are using stress as an excuse to avoid delivering? Gosh, I think you'd have to have a good record keeping there would be the first thing. And also to really engage with some employment relations people, just so that you know that you're doing things legally. I think at the end of the day, you know, the decision around that, you'll know your own context around that. But what you do need to do, and it is part of the employment law in terms of the Health and Safety Act, is to show support for people. So look to support them, as well as working with your ER person to create some of those boundaries and expectations around delivery as well. So a little bit of give and take there, I think. But yeah, I'd be guided by some employment relations people on that. Great. Well, it's a few minutes to, Lisa. So that's probably all the time that I have for the questions. One thing that I just wanted to note is that as part of the Institute of Organisational Psychology, that there are some resources, and I can make that link available that Beyond can share with you as well. So thank you. Lisa, back to you. You're on mute for me, Lisa.
Right, I think I'm back on. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Megan. That was fantastic. You've certainly provided our attendees with very good insights and lots of takeaways to go away and think about. And I guess some very helpful tips there and sites and links that everybody can tap into. There have been a number of questions around whether we'll provide the slides. I think Megan would be absolutely fine to provide the slides, so we'll send those out together with the webinar. And also, there have been some questions around the Harold Hillman links, which we can send out as well. So we have run out of time, unfortunately, and a great topic. We know that the challenges will continue through these trying times, but there's always a solution to how, you know, we deal with the challenges at a given time. And as you so rightly said, Megan, you know, we're not alone in dealing with the challenges, and that's important to remember, whether it's as leaders, as employers, or as individuals. You know, there are other people experiencing the same thing, and, you know, to have those tips handy is very, very useful. So on behalf of Beyond Recruitment, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning. I'd like to say a huge big thanks to Megan, our partner, and her insights and you know, contribution that we get from you every year. Thank you so much. And just a reminder again that the webinar has been recorded and that we will send it to every person attending. And we certainly look forward to working with you again next year, Megan, and I'm sure a lot of the attendees will be asking whether you'll be doing this for us next year as well. So on behalf of Beyond Recruitment and myself, a huge thank you to Megan and a huge thanks to all our attendees. Enjoy your day and ngā mihi. Thank you.
Thank you.